Coming up on Nebraska Stories, remembering DeWitte, Nebraska's largest African-American settlement. An amateur filmmaker's cosmic playground. A tiny pellet of poison. And pianos where you least expect them.
When driving down a highway, have you ever found yourself wondering about the area you're driving through? Author Stu Magnusson is one such person, and he's turned his curiosity into a book.
I wanted to write about Highway 83 because my dad grew up alongside it. My grandparents lived their whole lives in Stapleton, Nebraska. And my grandmother, whenever I would borrow a bicycle to go ride out to the South Loop River, she would always call out after me, "Be careful, that highway runs from Canada to Mexico." And as a 12-year-old, I'm thinking, wow, that's really interesting.
U.S. Highway 83 is among the longest highways in the United States, and it runs through the middle of Nebraska.
I wanted to write this book as kind of a hybrid travel history book. It would be my experience traveling the highway, and then I come across interesting historical vignette of one of these roadside signs, and then I would take that and turn it into a chapter that is a piece of American history.
It would be the lack of a historical marker that would set Magnusson on an unexpected journey.
I always kind of wondered, why isn't there a historical marker for DeWitte Brownlee, which is the longest, most successful African-American rural settlement in Nebraska.
South of Valentine, and only a few miles off Highway 83, today Brownlee has a population of about 15 people. Organized in 1887, it was a thriving town of white settlers. When the Kincaid Act of 1904 went into effect, the town not only grew, it became a harmonious, biracial community as blacks settled along the Loop River.
I wanted to come to this area, to Brownlee, DeWitte, because this is my dad's home. He was born in Overton, and from the time he was 10 years old, grew up here in DeWitte. He talked about it all the time. So I grew up thinking I knew a place that I'd never been. This is my first trip here, and I think it's everything that he said it was.
Catherine's father, William, was the youngest child of Charles and Esther Meehan, a biracial couple who emigrated from Canada in 1885 to live in Nebraska.
Grandpa wanted land, and I think all of the homesteaders who came wanted land. Some of them had land in Canada, but they were very small portions. They lived in areas that were not large farming homesteads. They were probably what today we would call town. I think my grandfather, though, wanted an opportunity to be able to give more to his family than he had in Canada. And Nebraska, I think, just suited him. It was that opportunity.
After the Kincaid Act opened land in Cherry County, the Meehans, along with several other black families, began settling along a 14-mile stretch of the North Loop River in 1906. They called their settlement DeWitte.
In all of the stories that Dad told, he seldom talked about any discrimination here. One of the things that he typically said about DeWitte, about Nebraska in general, but DeWitte specifically, was people were people. Your neighbors were your neighbors. And I can just hear him saying that. I think realistically, there probably were differences that were difficult for people to overcome on both sides. But the impression I got is that people realized that there are not many of us out here, black or white, and we need to figure out how to get along because we never know when we're going to need one another.
When race riots were happening in cities across the United States, including Omaha, the black and white people in the communities of DeWitt and Brownlee lived together in peace.
You have the story of an interracial couple. You have integrated one-room schoolhouses. You have the two communities coming together on the 4th of July to celebrate this very quintessential American holiday. And they played baseball games and had a little rodeo and a picnic and so on. And this is what you find in the historical record. The memoirs you read of the settlers just mention all these things. They don't mention anything else.
By 1910, there were 82 residents in the DeWitt settlement, and over the years, numbers may have reached as high as 150. At some point, DeWitt was renamed Audacious, and all continued to go well for at least a couple more decades. But then the Dust Bowl years began, and by 1936, the last resident of DeWitt moved away. It would take another 80 years for the unique history of DeWitt to be recognized.
Why isn't there a marker here? Then I kind of towards the end of the research of the book, I started to get a hold of some of the descendants. And I said, you know what, I'm just going to look into this.
With a little research and crowdfunding, Stu and Catherine were able to get a historical marker for DeWitt. And on a cool April morning, a formal dedication was held along Highway 83.
I never lived in Nebraska, and I never visited Cherry County before, but I grew up with the names DeWitt and Audacious constantly in my ears. My dad, William Meehan, seemed to carry Nebraska with him. In so many ways, this feels like coming home. I heard my father and cousins comment that there was no prejudice out here, that people were just people, and neighbors were neighbors.
How about that?
An immediate kinship formed between some 200 people as they gathered on the remote Nebraska highway, crossing color lines and collapsing time.
It's heartwarming. I think that the ancestors would be really, really pleased, very happy to know that this many years later, a century later, they're still remembered.
And of course, no Nebraska hometown welcome is complete without a potluck.
I only thought that it would be more the people who are directly connected to the actual people who lived here, and I didn't think that there was going to be such a large response from the community itself.
Yes, this has just been a phenomenal experience. This is my first time here, and we've both been just pleasantly surprised at how friendly the people are. That's what's just actually blown us away, is that everyone has just reached out and embraced us of all races. I mean, the majority of people that have been here are actually Brownlee descendants, and they embraced the DeWitt descendants just like they were family.
And coming back here and seeing the way that my ancestors were taken in by the other homesteaders, I think that really does take heart, because it shows that we have come a long way.
That our family made it out here and built a town and were educated.
It's very humbling, and really it gives you perspective of how difficult it was and how much they achieved.
I'm not surprised. A hopeful message is here. And Lord, in our times, we're having trouble as a society holding together. And so this is just a little glimmer, a little ray, that we can live together.
There's evidence that I had a good time.
If good things come in small packages, then maybe what started in two little Nebraska communities, between people who found they had more in common than not, can serve to remind us of what is possible.
What drew me to filmmaking was when Star Trek came out and Lost in Space. They were such fantastic TV series about space.
Bill Hedges loves sci-fi movies, so much that he's built his own spaceship set in his basement.
I try to keep the upstairs fairly normal looking. I figured downstairs I can, go wild, and that's what I did. I bought this book called The Making of Star Trek, and it detailed all of how, everything about how Star Trek was made, all the behind-the-scenes stuff. It had blueprints in there, how the stages were designed. So I can switch from day to night in here.
Hedges grew up on a farm outside Lyons. As a kid, he came to town for movies at the local theater.
Back in the 60s, the theater was a popular place for people to hang out, especially in a small town. That was the place to go on, Saturday nights, because that was before there was television. People would get their news from newsreels. I got a job here as a projectionist at the theater when I was 13, and I worked here, through high school, which was kind of a fun job to have. My favorite film was The Absent-Minded Professor. For graduation, my folks gave me a Kodak Super 8 movie camera, and I used that to make some little shorts, a lot of stop frame animation movies, and that was the start of my amateur filmmaking career. My folks gave me this.
After high school, Hedges served in the Navy and worked in the Fremont Post Office. He kept making home movies. But in 1985, the Lyons Theater closed.
I hated to see it disappear because it was such a source of entertainment for me, and being as I worked there too.
So Hedges bought as much of it as he could and built a home theater in his basement as an homage.
I had a lot of beach movies, spy movies back then, westerns, comedies. Well, this is some of the things I had saved from the Lyons Theater. So I used to go through these very same doors.
In 2014, the old Lyons Theater building came up for sale. He bought it. In the last couple years, Hedges has turned the old theater from a place designed to show movies into a place to make them.
Nebraska, it's just all cornfields and rolling hills, so I had to make my own alien planet here. It's an incredible playground for an amateur filmmaker to have the facilities to film anything here. I can have just to have the space to actually build sets and miniatures is something I could never do at home. This is my stage 2, and I built a ancient ruins set in here.
He's built sets for films he plans to make, including a new series co-starring his cat.
Basically about me and my cat and adventures in space, meeting other aliens, and it's going to be kind of a parody, not a serious sci-fi, but I have about 12 episodes written so far, so. To match between the different scenes, this is a miniature of me and my cat in there, which also matches the interior of that spaceship and also the interior of my set in my basement. Still got to add the plexiglass to the window, though.
He builds props out of all kinds of things, many of them scavenged.
My series is going to have a lot of parodies in here, and one of them is from The Good and the Bad and the Ugly.
But it's not all sci-fi sets.
This is the original lobby, and I tried
He's restored part of the building to how it used to be, even reinstalling the original film projectors upstairs. This building lets Hedges tie past to present, making movies in the very space that cultivated his love of the art.
Other people in town seem to appreciate it too, because I get people asking for tours of it once in a while, which is fun to talk to them too, because they just share their memories of coming here and they point out things that they remember. So it's nice to preserve a little bit of that.
And he's never lost his childhood love of movie making. In 2015, he created a film about the history of Lyons. Now, he's working on training his cat for his next project.
Drop down. Okay, high five. High five me, he'll jump up on my shoulder, so I'm trying to train him to come and, stop, hit his mark. If you want to get a lot of views on YouTube, all you have to do is put a cat on the internet and you're automatically guaranteed an audience there. Cats and space, I think that's a winning combination.
It's the autumn of 1915 on the Omaha Indian Reservation in Nebraska. A small package arrives at a stately house in the center of town. What's inside that package will bring together the lives of two remarkable women, the very first Native American doctor and a Nobel Prize-winning scientist. The package comes from across the ocean, from the famous Madame Curie. Like other women in her native Poland, Marie Curie had been barred from higher education. So she went to Paris, to the Sorbonne, to study chemistry, math, and physics. There, she discovered a strange new substance and won the Nobel Prize twice. The package is addressed to a woman who also broke through formidable barriers to get an education. Susan LaFlèche was born on the American frontier in 1865, just 2 years before Marie Curie. The daughter of a powerful Omaha chief, Susan graduated first in her class from the Woman's Medical College of Pennsylvania and returned home to fight for the very survival of her tribe. Wherever she went, she healed bodies and lifted spirits. By 1915, Dr. Susan LaFlèche Picotte is a 50-year-old widow and mother, as well as the respected doctor for hundreds of patients, Indian and white. But the work has taken a toll. In mid-September, she lies in the upstairs bedroom of her Walt Hill, Nebraska home, dying of cancer triggered by persistent ear infections. Weeks before, Dr. Susan's sister and brother-in-law had written a letter to Marie Curie in France. They knew she had discovered a radioactive element called radium. Curie believed radium could diminish pain and possibly cure cancer. Would she answer their request? And now, just in time, here it is, a package from Paris. Inside the package, a lead-lined box. Inside the box, a tiny pellet of radium. Upstairs in Dr. Susan's bedroom, the agency doctor places the pellet in her ear, but it accidentally slips into the ear canal, and it takes hours to get it out. Susan dies soon after, but she would have died anyway. Her body lay in state in the house she had designed herself, by the fireplace with the carving, East, West, home is best. And she meant it. One of her last triumphs was to build a hospital right up the street from her house on the Omaha Reservation, open to everyone. And what about Marie Curie? She died in 1934 at age 66 from exposure to radium in her research, and from a radium-laced pendant given to her in honor of her scientific discoveries, a pellet of poison she wore around her neck.
Down. Jason Peterson and his crew have unloaded and moved plenty of pianos.
You know, this piano probably won't fit in doors, average home doors.
They've rolled them from one house to another, From shops to homes, upstairs, through hallways. But they've never had a move like this.
Some pianos go to concerts in parks, but this is the first time where we're actually putting them in a park and walking away from them.
Once this piano and its parts are secure, it's time for the finishing touch. A sign calling out to the public, announcing a purpose.
Play me, I'm yours.
The vision of British artist Luke Jerram, Play Me, I'm Yours, is a public art project which has been touring internationally since 2008. Paris, London, Geneva. Play Me, I'm Yours has installed more than 1,000 pianos at locations all around the world. For 2 weeks last summer, it was Omaha's turn to play host. 10 pianos, decorated by local artists, were placed in public areas all over the city.
What we're hoping it does is to bring people from different walks of life, different ethnic and cultural backgrounds, and different age groups.
Sally Ray works for Luke Jerram and says he came up with the idea while sitting in a laundromat after he noticed no one was talking to each other.
He was wondering how he could break down those barriers, and he was thinking, wow, if I put a piano in here, people would start playing it and start talking to each other.
The idea to paint the pianos came later. And adds a different element to the project by involving the local art community.
And it also makes them more approachable. I think if they just look like a normal piano, people might just think it's in the middle of being transported from one place to another.
No one knows for sure how many people actually played the Omaha pianos, but they did play. It's exactly the outcome the Omaha Creative Institute hoped for when it began planning for the project almost 2 years ago.
We are doing all of this because it is a great way to involve people in the community in the arts that may not be part of the art scene. It's just to show how ubiquitous and how important arts are to our world and to our lives. We have music, painting, dancing, singing, storytelling, writing, all connected together.
For the hundreds, possibly thousands of people who experienced Play Me, I'm Yours in Omaha, the playing may have stopped. But the music continues. The project puts forth a concept we could all learn from. When people come together and share a piece of themselves, the harmony of life and art is a thing of beauty.
Watch our stories online at netnebraska.org/Nebraska Stories, and go to Facebook to like us and leave a comment. Join the Nebraska Stories conversation. Nebraska Stories is funded by the Margaret and Martha Thomas Foundation, the Nebraska Office of Highway Safety, the Nebraska Tourism Commission, First Nebraska Bank, and the Brownville Fine Arts Association. Sustained funding for arts coverage is provided by the H. Lee and Carol Gendler Charitable Fund.